death of a Palestinian prisoner. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi received a phone call from his Kenyan counterpart, William Ruto, on Tuesday. During a telephone conversation, the two leaders discussed the latest developments in the Sudanese crisis. Presidential spokesman Ahmed Fahmy said they had agreed on the importance of continuing efforts to reach a comprehensive and sustainable ceasefire. President al-Sisi and Ruto also expressed their support to peaceful dialogue efforts as well as a resumption of transitional stage with the aim of achieving peace and stability, in addition to enhancing the development and reconstruction path in Sudan. The two sides further probed means of pushing forward bilateral ties, especially at a trade exchange level, in addition to expanding Egyptian investments in vital sectors in Kenya to consolidate the country's development efforts. Both leaders agreed to continue consultations and coordination over issues of mutual concern in the next stage, especially a support of the joint African action in light of its role played by Egypt and Kenya in this regard. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi held a press interview with the Japanese newspaper Asahi. The interview with the newspaper's editor-in-chief tackled a number of files, including the Egyptian-Japanese relations and bilateral cooperation regarding a number of international issues and crises. The story.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi held an interview with the Japanese newspaper Asahi, one of the biggest and oldest Japanese newspapers, on the sidelines of the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's visit to Egypt. The interview with the newspaper's editor-in-chief tackled a number of files, among them the Egyptian-Japanese relations and cooperation between the two countries in settling international issues and crises. During the interview, President al-Sisi stressed Egypt and Japan's keenness on boosting bilateral cooperation, hailing the strong relations between the two countries and cooperation in the field of development. The head of state also pointed to the ongoing coordination between the two states in the framework of Japan's presidency of the Group of Seven of the biggest industrial countries to find solutions for the dangerous international crisis. On top of them, the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, in addition to food, energy and funding crisis. The president also asserted Egypt's position towards the current crisis in the region, pointing to Egyptian foreign policy, which is based on refusing the intervention in other countries' affairs and respecting the principle of sovereignty and settlement of disputes with peaceful means. The president also presented Egypt's status towards the developments in Sudan, pointing to Egypt's efforts to achieve ceasefire and paving the way for peaceful dialogue and completing the transitional phase in order to protect the Sudanese people from the grave humanitarian threats of war.
Minister of Defense and Military Production Mohammed Zaki met with his Yemeni counterpart Mohsen Mohammed Hussein al-Darai and his accompanying delegation. The two ministers discussed a number of issues of mutual concern in the field of military cooperation and exchange of experiences between the armed forces of both countries. Minister Zaki affirmed his appreciation of the well-established relations with Yemen and its keenness to increase cooperation and partnership in various military fields. For his part, the Yemeni minister praised Egypt's influence and active role in the regional and international arenas. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli stressed on the significance of following up implementation of the current projects of the Decent Life initiative to upgrade the countryside. This came during a meeting chaired by the Prime Minister to follow up on the executive status of the first phase of Decent Life initiative, as well as preparations for launching the second phase. During the meeting, the Premier asserted the importance of accelerating the finalization of service complexes to help the residents after receiving the units. The first phase of the Decent Life covers 1,477 villages in 20 governorates nationwide. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli said a unified vision for startup companies should be put by all concerned authorities to ensure no intra-contradictions of jurisdictions. The directive was made at a meeting the Prime Minister held with the Minister of Communication and Information Technology and several other officials in follow-up efforts to enhance and support startups and to confront challenges facing the companies, notably IT startups that are considered drivers of economic growth. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli stressed the significance of following up the implementation process concerning transportation projects in a bid to achieve development aspects and facilitating the movement of citizens and goods. Madbouli directed the Ministry of Planning to disburse £1 billion to the Ministry of Transportation to resume important road projects and axes. The Prime Minister's remarks came during his meeting with the Minister of Transportation, Kamil Wazir, to review the executive position of a number of projects. For his part, the minister reviewed the position of the third and fourth phases of the electric train project, which extends at a length of 105.2 kilometers with a total of 19 stations. The monorail project east and west of the Nile, as well as developing the ring road, were also discussed during the meeting. The General Coordinator of the National Dialogue, Diya Rashwan, invited representatives of the Egyptian and foreign press and media outlets accredited in Egypt to attend the opening session of the National Dialogue at the Nefertiti Hall Exhibition Complex in Nasr City on Wednesday. The General Coordinator stated that the presence of the journalists and media specialists for coverage does not require a prior invitation. The representatives of the Egyptian press and media outlets will have their invitations according to letters and cards of accreditation from their unions and organizations. For representatives of the foreign press and media accredited in Egypt will have invitations from the State Information Services. Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri said President El-Sisi had given his directives to all state institutions to provide the highest level of care and hospitality to the Sudanese brothers. During a meeting with the ambassador Dafa Allah Al-Hajj Ali, the special envoy of the Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, head of Sudan's Sovereign Council, Shukri stressed the need to reach an immediate ceasefire and for all parties to commit to a truce. The top diplomat stressed that Cairo is keen to deal with the crisis in Sudan as an internal matter and stresses the importance of international and regional respect of Sudan's sovereignty and refraining from intervening in a way that would lead to igniting the situation and shedding more blood. During the meeting, the Sudanese envoy delivered an oral message from the head of the Sudanese Council to the president over the latest developments in Sudan. Burhan expressed gratitude for the leadership in Egypt and for the Egyptian people over the war welcome to Sudanese citizens fleeing war in the country. Meanwhile, Kastal border crossing between Egypt and Sudan is witnessing a flow of buses carrying many nationalities into Egypt to be sent back to their home countries. The crossing is one of 3 evacuation points from Sudan to Egypt along the Arkin crossing and Port Sudan harbor. The Arab League Council continued on Tuesday its meeting on the level of permanent representatives to review the latest developments in Sudan. The council meetings on Monday were presided by Egypt, which said it has received over 40,000 Sudanese citizens since the start of the crisis in Kastal-Arkan border crossing. It said 2,500 more other nationalities arrived in Egypt fleeing Sudan. The Arab League meeting coincides with the convention of an emergency meeting of Arab Social Affairs ministers and another of Arab health ministers. The 2 meetings are held in response to a call by Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Abul Ghait to create a common Arab distance towards the crisis and its humanitarian and health repercussions on the Sudanese people. On the ground, hundreds have been killed and thousands wounded as airstrikes and artillery exchanges have gripped swaths of Greater Khartoum, sparking the exodus of thousands of Sudanese to neighboring countries. More than 100,000 refugees have crossed from Sudan to neighboring countries to escape the conflict that erupted last month, while hundreds of thousands have been displaced within the country destroyed.
Fierce fighting between rival generals raged on in Sudan Tuesday, despite the latest truce as warned